Well, hi everyone. Oh, an interactive group. Well, great to be talking live finally at an event. I hope you guys are having a great GDC. Just to make sure that you're in the right place, I'm going to be talking about challenging Supercell's sacred cows and the importance of evolving culture as you grow. Just a little bit about Supercell. We're probably best known for our 5 games: Clash of Clans, Boom Beach, Heyday, Clash Royale, Brawl Stars. We have 250 million monthly players playing those games. We're also somewhat known for our game teams killing their beloved games when they just don't quite reach the experience that we want to create for our players around the world. So we're currently almost hitting 400 people from a headcount standpoint. The majority of the people you'll see are based in Helsinki, where Supercell was founded and born. The games that you saw on the previous slide were all developed in Helsinki, but we now have game development happening in Shanghai, and our latest news was that we're opening up a North American studio. And our why, our dream, is to create great games that as many people as possible play for years and remembered forever. So now for the most important part of the talk. Who am I? I don't know if you can tell from my accent, which is a little bit mixed up these days, but originally from England, started in gaming actually in the mid-80s, and was one of the people to launch Electronic Arts in Europe. I then found myself at Electronic Arts in the US, was VP of marketing there, and then went on to co-found Pogo, a web game startup, which of course was then acquired by Electronic Arts. So went back there for a while longer. Have to admit, I had a couple of my own failed gaming startups. And so I took a little bit of a detour for a while to explore actually being outside of gaming, and went into philanthropy. And I ended up coming back to gaming and coming to Supercell to launch our philanthropic efforts. And that's what I do now, but I've also worn many other hats, and I'm really happy and proud right now to be our first co-chief people officer at Supercell, along with my fabulous partner in crime, Frida Johansson. Hi, Frida. So let's just talk more about culture. You may have seen the next couple of slides. If you've seen any of our talks, we've talked about this before, but the traditional model of operating a company is where you have a few leaders at the top who are creating the vision for teams, who are telling the teams, what they should be doing, and then the teams are the ones that execute on that. The Supercell model from the beginning has been a little bit different. We've tried to sort of flip this model upside down, and actually it's the stars, the teams themselves, the games teams, who are making all of those decisions. The leadership, or the management are really there to help them focus on creating those great game experiences. It's not the only piece of our culture, but it's definitely at the heart of it, where teams get to be independently making these decisions without seeking approval from the outside or from leadership. So now let's talk about evolving culture. And I'll talk a little bit about why we think it's important, a little bit about our cultural journey as a company, and then also our sort of latest culture assessment that we did last year. So here's a quote that I used to attribute to Ilke until I found out that he'd actually stolen it from Marshall Goldsmith. But it's something we talk about at Supercell. You know, what got you here won't get you there. The importance, again, of learning, evolving, and not getting stuck. And this is our most recent culture memo, which I'll talk to you a little bit later. But at the end there, you can see that we end the memo with basically culture is never done. And so that's something that we believe strongly in. So I'm going to take a little trip down memory lane here. The timeline starts in 2009. That was a year before Supercell was founded. And then the blue numbers are our head count. And then obviously the game logos are when our games launched. So it was actually the year before Supercell was founded that Ilke, our CEO, came across the Netflix culture deck. And you probably have all read that by now, but at the time it was quite new. And the crux of that was around freedom and independence and responsibility. And so Ilke thought about, you know, the deck itself at Netflix was very focused on individuals and how individuals work. And he thought, you know, this would be kind of a really interesting model for teams. The other thing that him and his founders, when they founded Supercell in 2010, took from the Netflix deck was the statement or the idea that it's really the best people that make the best games. But the colossal mistake, and those are his words, not mine, but you know, his mistake was that he just never wrote anything down. At the very first holiday party at Supercell, he wanted to talk about culture, and so he just presented the actual Netflix culture deck. But it was in 2012 where he was hanging out with a bunch of early Supercellians, and they were talking about responsibility, and he realized that everyone had slightly different interpretations of what that word actually meant. So that was the time where he thought, you know what, I've got to start to put this on top of the to-do list. And at this time, he did a lot of one-on-ones with all the people in the company at that point to really just trying to get an understanding of what the values of the company should be. But it did take another couple of years until there was an actual sort of official Supercell culture deck, which focused around, you know, the best people, how they work together, and our purpose. And this deck was presented at an offsite. It was really, really full of great content, but in many ways just far too much content. So what then was realized through the years is that it was so rich in content that no one really could remember very much from it. So then we kind of went to the other side and decided, well, we need to streamline that content. And so that was another mistake, perhaps not as important as the one of not writing it down, but that was the next mistake. But during this particular cultural assessment, there were a few good things that actually came out of that process. So I mentioned earlier that we had taken that statement around sort of the best people make the best games, and that was something that we talked a lot about in the company. But we then came to that realization over the years that it isn't necessarily the best people that make the best games. It's really the best teams, and it's how great people work together within a team. So it was a fundamental shift in our thinking. The other thing that we did during that cultural assessment was write down for the first time our dream and the mission of the company. And then we organized our thinking about what did we need to do to actually pursue that dream. And so that was looking more into the best people, the best teams, and the best culture or environment to support our dream. So back to our mistake. where we basically sort of streamlined everything with all good intentions, but we ended up with sort of short catchphrases for things. Perhaps the best example is Supercell first. And understandably, people interpreted that in many different ways, and some people interpreted it as Supercell above anything else, above personal lives and personal well-being, and that obviously wasn't the intention behind that. It was more to say in an environment where we're heavily focused on teams, just to give some, some indication and help as to how teams can work together. Oops. So that led us to, in 2019, our first culture memo. And the difference there was we decided that we did need to put a little bit more material into our culture deck. And we moved it to this format of a memo, which was meant to be read. The deck is more for perhaps presentation purposes only. But the memo meant that we could include a lot more information there around different scenarios and how to think and behave in those scenarios. So finally, as I said last year, we went through probably our most exhaustive exercise of taking another look at our culture. Before I sort of go into that process that we went through, I thought this would just be interesting to share. So at the beginning of 2021, when we kind of came back from our Christmas break, we had our first company update with Ilka, and he posed this very, interesting, provocative, and actually really inspiring question about, are our best days at Supercell behind us, or are they ahead of us? And obviously, we decided they're ahead of us, but it was a very interesting thing for all of us as Supercellians to think about, and also set the tone, I think, for 2021 and even the culture assessment. So looking at how we went ahead with this review, but just a few sort of learnings to start with. So one thing I think that is important, it might sound very obvious, but is to set a goal and to share it. We announced earlier in the year that we were going to complete a cultural assessment within the year. We missed it by a month, but it was important enough kind of body of work to slip by a month. The other thing I would say is that just because we take a conscious effort every 2 to 3 years to look at our culture, we approach it with, looking at it from what can we improve, as opposed to, do we need to improve? And then as you're exploring, perhaps your own culture assessments, focus on sort of the actual usage and practices. At the end of the day, culture is about action and behaviors. So this is how we went about our culture assessment process. We started with some pre-group discussions, and they were small group discussions with the leadership team. We had, some folks who'd been with the company for a really long time, people from game development, but we also brought in some people that had only been with the company perhaps for less than a year. The most recent people that had read our culture memo and wanted to just make sure, were we living what they had read earlier in the year. The second thing we did was a company-wide survey, and then after that we had these deep dive focus groups, and then the end result was a revised culture memo. So the survey itself, it had just 2 simple questions. And then the first one here was, what do you love about our culture that you would never want to change? And you can see the different themes here that jumped out. Many of them are the ones that I've been sort of talking about that have been core to our culture and the way that we operate from the beginning. So, independence, trust, freedom, responsibility. The second question that we asked was, what needs to change so that you can do your best work at Supercell? And some of the themes there you'll see are, communication. Some people said nothing needed to change. Discussions around mental health, the evolving role of a lead at Supercell. So then we jumped into these deep dive discussions. We used an external party for that, and we had 11 groups and about a quarter of the company participated. They self-selected to join a topic that was interesting to them. And you'll see there we touched on some of the topics around where people thought, we could change in order to improve people's work lives at Supercell. But we also did some groups that would focus on our strengths. And, how can we take these things like independence and trust, and how can we build on them and be even stronger? So that led us to, that exhaustive process of about 8 months, led us to a new culture memo. And sort of no surprise, what didn't change in the culture memo was a lot of the sort of the meat and the heart of Supercell. Our mission stayed the same. Our, the traits around independence, responsibility, trust, etc. stayed the same. But there were some new things within the memo, and some things that perhaps were there before, but were highlighted a little bit more. So the first one is what we call internally the improvement mindset. And, if you're familiar with Carol Dweck's book, Mindset, around the growth mindset, it's the same concept. How can we continue to improve? How can we learn daily? How can we be more open to risks and new ideas? And how can we really think about making our games better every day? Another theme that we really introduced a little bit more front and center in the memo was around mental health and well-being. And I think the shift there for us was more, less about the individual and the responsibilities of the individual, but really what's at the root of mental health and well-being challenges, and where's Supercell's role in that, and where do teams play in that, and really encouraging teams to sit down and discuss this topic at that team level. Sort of connected with this was a discussion around healthy team size. So, Supercell, part of our identity has been small teams, and it still is small teams in comparison to many, many other companies. But I think what we learn is that one size doesn't fit all, and there's different team situations, stages of development, where we might need to look through different lenses. So, for a new game, 2 to 5 people, that makes a lot of sense. But as we're getting to beta games and live games, we wanted to introduce other lenses. So one being, what's the ambition that we want for our players? What do we want to deliver to support our player community? And then the second lens also being, what do we need to do to make sure that we are creating the healthiest work experiences for our Supercellians? Sorry. The final one was, again, just highlighting a little bit more the concept of inclusion and belonging. It's something that we think is core to high-performing teams, creating that open, safe environment where ideas are heard, and it doesn't matter who says them. So this is sort of the final delivery, I guess, of the culture memo. So this is Greg Harper, who's our GM at the international offices. And he presented a company update, and shortly after that, we published the memo. But I wanted to just add as well that Ilka, our CEO, immediately jumped onto Slack and was asking, you know, what's missing? You know, what do you guys think about this? Are there things on this piece of paper, these words that you're not seeing in action that you think where we can be better? And I bring it up in the concept of learning, and that learning process started from, you know, sort of day one of publishing this memo. So some of the key lessons that I just wanted to highlight. Again, start early, write it down, you know, especially amongst, if there's, you know, founders out there who are just starting off, there is always something perhaps else to do, but it's so important. You know, set goals and listen hard to your teams. What are you hearing from them? Challenge your sacred cows. That can be very, very, very difficult, I think, you know, very sensitive and very brave thing to do. And then again, as I said, it's about actions. It's not about presentations and decks and memos. And another thing that's super powerful, I think, is when you see culture in action to, you know, share that and broadcast it. So just to end here on, you know, culture is never done. You know, we think it will continue to evolve at Supercell. We believe that we will continue to learn, and so our culture will evolve. So that's the end of my talk. This is a sort of shameless plug for my other gig where I run the social impact, but just wanted to use this opportunity if you were interested. So we've donated as a company €1 million to the UNHCR for Ukrainian refugees, but we also set up a fundraiser for others to donate through that, and we'll match it. So we'll match individual donations, but we've also worked with some other small studios that if they want to make a donation, we'll match that. And thank you for coming. If you have any questions, Brian's here.
Hello, Philip from Octo.
Hello.
Regarding COVID, have you seen any challenge in keeping the culture and related to remote work? And the second question, I see you have many offices around the globe. Can you have the same culture in these different countries? Yeah.
Yeah, they're both great questions. Yeah, sure. I think, you know, COVID's been as challenging for Supercell as other companies. But I think that given that it's been helpful having such a strong culture to start with. And I think you know, one has to over-communicate in an area where we have very little connection. So just doing our very best like others. It has been challenging, I think, for, you know, of course, we've had a lot of people join during COVID and we haven't met each other. I'm looking forward for that to happen. But I think just starting with that core culture and then having more of a habit of being over-communicative has been helpful. And so to your second question, yeah, it is an interesting one, but I think that our core culture, which I've made it pretty clear, is around the concept of independent teams, you know, works everywhere. And certainly there may be slightly, you know, different nuances with, you know, our culture in Shanghai or even in San Francisco. But I think at its core, you know, we hire people that are excited about being part of that culture. And I think it's something that we can hang on to in all of our offices. Hi.
Thank you. Very interesting process. It seems like a bit of a daunting process. I was wondering if on a team basis you have practices like I know with some of my teams, we have been doing, every week as we discuss not just the project, but, at the end, we always discuss, like, how we working together, what is working, what is not working, what is like one thing we can change next week and try it and then, iterate. So are your teams like also constantly like revising their own culture? Because at the company level, it's a huge task, but like, do you have any micro, like regenerative practices?
No, I think that's great what you're saying. It's sort of a good example of the sort of improvement mindset that we think is really important. One of the things that we've introduced recently in the Helsinki office is just the process of teams sitting down and talking about their individually what ways they want to work, and then collectively how does that sort of fit. And I think that's just about becoming stronger as a team, but it's also very helpful when we're talking about mentally healthy workplaces and having those conversations which perhaps haven't happened in the past. Thank you.
Hi there. My name is Nikki, and thank you so much for this presentation. It was really interesting and really exciting to also hear that Supercell, sort of this role model of a company that it is, sort of also goes through these sort of culture evolutions and growing pains and things like that. And my question is more so regarding, you highlighted the focus and desire from a cultural level on more risk-taking and things like that. I'd love for you to sort of dive a little bit more into detail about that in particular, just because, again, Supercell being a role model, from the outside looking in, it seems like you guys have like this great system of really intimate teams, having that independence to be able to take that risk-taking, and that you guys aren't afraid to sort of kill projects that aren't quite hitting the notes that you wanted. So just to learn a little bit more about, your guys' struggle with risk-taking, and for us to learn a little bit more.
Yeah, I think, again, as you said, it's sort of been core to our culture from the very beginning that, quality was one of our earlier values, and what does a quality experience look like? So empowering our teams to make decisions about that. So, all of those decisions being in the team model. Also, and I think part of our introducing the concept of the improvement mindset, and Ilka's talked to us about, the best days behind or ahead, is how can we be better about that, and how can we be better both individually, sort of challenging ourselves on a daily basis, as well as within a team, being perhaps a little bit more diligent about that improvement mindset.
That's awesome. Thank you so much.
When you define the culture, you're writing the memo, do you ever get resistance, people who disagree, and like, how do you work through that, if there is any?
No one ever disagrees.
Is it? Are you being serious?
No, I'm not. Sorry. It's my British sense of humor. Yeah, sure, people. I mean, you can just see from the process that we went through with, sort of between 2019 and 2021, clearly there were areas where we weren't necessarily perhaps living up to our culture. I think that we have we're still a fairly small company, and people aren't shy about sharing if they have something that they disagree with, and we encourage those conversations. We'd rather have those things out in the open and sort of working through it. But the reality is as well, we're clearly not going to be able to please everyone. But the important thing, I think, is the core components that are truly Supercell, that make us special, if we can be aligned there. But, also as a leadership team as well, we'll take in any of that information and have group discussions and figure out, are there areas where we need to continue to grow?
Hi, thanks a lot for the talk.
You're welcome.
Netflix has this idea of talent density, which requires processes to let people go. And does Supercell also have a similar culture? And how do you deal with these moments, or how do you deal with the talent density question?
Yeah, I mean, of course I think, Netflix and Supercell, well, there's many similarities. I think there's, different approaches to different things. And perhaps I've never worked at Netflix, so I can't really say, but on the outside, a little bit more, perhaps a, sort of direct culture. I would say on the Supercell side, it's pretty hard to get into Supercell, so we focus a lot on making sure that we are really attracting, the best talent, and put a lot of emphasis on that process. But, like any company, we might get it wrong, or it might not be the fit, and, we have those sort of difficult discussions.
Thanks.
Okay. Well, I would just say I'll be around a little bit, and we have a few other Supercellians here if you wanted to chat more on any of these topics. Thank you for coming.